Sort of all started with this book. When we were kids, long before we knew each other, we read this book. It's by Osa Johnson, about her. It's called I Married Adventure. It's about her and her husband Martin's travels around the world to the world's wild places, bringing back images and stories about places that people had never seen back then. It's the 1920s.
And I'll tell you, this book really changed both our lives. And we finally both married adventure.
Yes, we did.
We have seen some amazing things in our lives. We have stepped out of a lavvu at midnight, 120 miles above the Arctic Circle, at 30 degrees below zero, and seen the shimmering green lights of the aurora borealis.
We have placed our hands on the still warm flank of a tiger killed moments earlier by a rival tiger.
We have seen a pack of Cape hunting dogs tear an impala fawn apart in bits.
We have seen a lone white wolf stampede a herd of wood buffalo in the Northwest Territories.
We have seen thousands of pilgrims swarm down the Ghats and Benares to bathe and purify their souls in the Ganges.
On Yellowwater Billabong, we have seen a green tree python slowly swallow another snake head first.
We have seen a scorpion spider the size of a dinner plate on a night walk in the Peruvian jungle.
We have seen chimpanzees hunt, kill, and devour a red-tailed monkey in Chibali Forest in Uganda.
On the Siberian border of Mongolia, we have seen a reindeer shaman dance and heard her speak in tongues.
We have seen blue-footed boobies and browed albatross with 12-foot wingspans dance on Hood Island in the Galapagos.
We have seen a herd of reindeer in northern Norway race by us in the snow, sending up ice crystals tinted rose by the setting sun.
We have seen a deadly puff adder slither silently beside us as we sketched a hartebeest carcass in the Kalahari.
We have sat 10 feet away from a 500-pound silverback mountain gorilla in the impenetrable forest in Uganda.
There are still so many things to see, like the ancient city of Petra, carved out of solid stone, or Cossacks hunting with golden eagles, or maybe even starships off Venus.
Guess what? Our whole life of travel started in a phone booth. Our first date confirmed that we were meant for each other. We loved the same movies, had the same sense of humor, and loved animals. All Ted had to do was show me photos of his pet lion cub and chimpanzee, and I was hooked. The biggest dream we shared was to travel to East Africa to see the great herds of the Serengeti before they disappeared altogether. Since we were just married and short on cash, it didn't seem to be within our reach. One day I was walking down Madison Avenue and happened to look up at a big sign on the side of a building that said, "Adventure Travel." I decided it was a good omen, so heart pounding, I found myself climbing the stairs to their second floor offices. An hour later, I found myself in a phone booth calling Ted. "Guess what?" I said. "We're going to Africa." Finally, the childhood dream of a little girl from Clearfield, Pennsylvania, and a little boy 300 miles away in Buffalo, New York, was about to come true. Our big adventure to East Africa was to set the tenor of our lives. We saw herds of wildebeest, 1 million strong, on the Serengeti Plain. We saw black rhino, elephant, lion, leopard, giant forest hog, and gorgeous birds like carmine bee-eaters, lilac-breasted rollers, and forest kingfishers that light up the sky like fireworks. We saw tens of thousands of flamingos feeding in the Ngorongoro crater and the famous tree-climbing lions of Manyara. We visited nearby Olduvai Gorge, where the skull of the oldest humanoid in the world was discovered. Some Africans told us then, "You should have seen this in the 1950s. Well, the last time we were there was 1970. It was in Uganda, and they said, "We wish you could have seen this in the 1970s. We did.
This one's called The Artist's Eye, and this was actually the first game drive we did in Nairobi.
This is in Africa, by the way.
In Africa, yeah. One day on a game drive just outside Nairobi, we came upon a grazing antelope with lyre-shaped horns called a topi. We stood up in the van for a better view of from the roof hatch. The sun shone on its mostly gray coat. As the topi raised its head, its neck and back turned to a kaleidoscope of color. "Look at the gorgeous pinks and lavenders in the golden glow," I said. "I see purples and tinges of blue and copper," said Betsy. There was a couple standing next to us. I heard the wife whisper to her husband, "Are they looking at the same animal we are?"
Now we take you to Morocco. The Saffron Man. On the road to Taradant, in an area known the world over for growing saffron, the spice that gives such pungent flavor and deep orange color to food. It's very precious as it comes from the stigma of the crocus flower and is picked by hand. There was a tiny roadside shop in the middle of these vast fields of flowers where a man was selling the saffron. We went into his dark little shop with our guide, Brahim. The turbaned saffron man nodded and offered us mint tea poured from a silver pot into tiny glasses. Through Brahim, we asked the price of the saffron. $15, said Brahim. $15 a pound? We thought that was really cheap. At home, it costs a fortune for a tiny little glass vial. We told Brahim, tell him we'll take 4 pounds. The saffron seller's eyes really lit up, and he replaced the tiny balance scale with a larger one. He carefully poured a large pile of the saffron onto the scale and checked the weight. $15 is really cheap, we told Brahim. It is $15 an ounce, said Brahim. He spoke to the saffron seller, whose face wilted as he carefully poured the saffron back into a jar. We'll take an ounce, please.
This one is called Window of Opportunity. It's a windy, impenetrable forest, Uganda, 1997. Things had been quiet for a while, so we decided to take this window of opportunity and go. We'd been planning a journey to see the mountain gorillas for 5 years, but things kept happening. First a civil war in Rwanda, then unrest next door in Congo. We had heard of a group of mountain gorillas in a place called Windy Impenetrable Forest in Uganda, but Uganda was having its own war in the north. We called the American embassy in Kampala. "You didn't hear this from us, but I wouldn't go to Windy myself," said the voice on the other end of the phone. But now it all seemed to have quieted down, and not counting the 250,000 refugees in an outbreak of cholera in Goma, just 15 miles south of Windy. We finalized our plans for a car driver and guide with an African company to be paid advance US dollars, cash. They assured us it was safe. When we landed at the airport in Kampala, our guide Dolores rushed up to us and embraced us. "You're here at long last." That night we waited nervously with our pockets full of cash in a seedy little hotel on a back street. The rep from the company showed up, never looked at us, which made us very uneasy, took the money, counted it quickly, and left. The next morning, Dolores showed up with a van and a driver, and we headed for the back country. 30 miles from town, the tarmac ran out, and red mud tracks took over. The countryside was beaten and bruised from years of civil war. We slipped and skidded in the muck, got bogged down more than once, but finally, 9 hours later, arrived at the lantern-lit African Pearl cottages in Windy. That night, we stowed our gear and ready for bed. We couldn't help discussing what would be the best escape route if there was any kind of trouble. Maybe we would slip out the back door of the cottage and hide in the dense jungle. The next morning, Dolores handed us over to a Windy guide and told us our trek would be about 3 hours at most. As we headed up the mountain, we passed guards with automatic weapons. "They're there to protect the gorillas from the poachers," our guide was quick to say. 9 muddy, exhausting hours later, we had just about given up ever seeing gorillas when our guide said, "The gorillas, they are just there." We could see the vegetation moving, but we couldn't see them at all. We could hear their grunts. It sounds like people clearing their throats. We moved closer through knee-deep nettles, tearing at our legs. Our guides reached out and pulled back a tangled brillantasia vine, and then all of 500 magnificent pounds of him sat Cachupira, silverback leader of this group. He was stuffing stems and leaves into his mouth. We were just 10 feet from him. He ignored us completely. We watched him until our allotted hour was up, and we began the trek back in the dark. Altogether, it had been 12 brutal, exhausting hours. We staggered back into camp in the pitch black, covered with mud from slipping and sliding on the treacherous volcanic slopes, soaked with sweat and shivering violently in the night chill. Dolores rushed up forward and threw her arms around us. "I've never been so glad to see anyone in all my life," she cried, as if we had returned from the dead. We're filthy, we said. I don't care, I'm just so glad to see you. Thank God you're okay. We told her the gorillas, once we found them, were awesome, but the trek was brutal, the tangled forest impossible to walk in. That night, we couldn't get her extreme relief at seeing us out of our minds. After all, we were only trekking to see mountain gorillas. What could happen? 2 years later, Hutu rebels from Congo came down the mountain, attacked the camp at Bwindi, including African pearl cottages, shot the guards dead, singled out Americans, kidnapped them, took their shoes, and marched them up the mountains toward Congo. Those who couldn't make it were killed. Some escaped. When she heard the first gunshots, one girl slipped out of the back of her tent and hid in the dense jungle.
Lime green rubber boots. All day long on the way to Queen Elizabeth National Park, we passed jeeps full of Ugandan troops, armed to the teeth with automatic weapons. We had left Bwindi and were on our way to Queen Elizabeth National Park. As we rode along in our combi, my eyes scanned the mountains. That's where the rebels are, I thought. I wonder if they're watching us with binoculars. We were still jittery after our guide Dolores' extreme relief when we returned to camp so late after visiting the gorillas, and from the lady at Crater Lake Hotel saying, "Things are quiet for the moment." The jeeps full of combat soldiers that kept passing us didn't help either. We had been warned about the possibility of fallen trees or other debris that would cause us to stop the vehicle and try to clear the road. It could be a trap. We could be ambushed by rebels hiding in the roadside brush who would rob and perhaps even kill us. At last we stopped for lunch at a small hotel above Kasisi. Sitting at a table on the open patio and still keeping a wary eye on the mountains, we heard the screech of brakes slamming car doors in gruff, muffled voices. We jumped up and ran to the steps, where I nearly collided with a soldier the size of a refrigerator, in camouflage and a green beret and green jungle boots. He glared at me, stone-faced. "Hello," I smiled weakly. He shoved past me like I wasn't there, joined the rest of the troops in batting down the doors in the hotel.
This is called Bruce the Mongoose. It's guided Camp Chitwan National Park, Nepal, February 1983. "Look, a mongoose," said Betsy. We were sitting by the Dungla River in guided camp. A mongoose scooted directly towards us. "Don't worry," said the camp manager. "That's Bruce. He hangs around the camp. He's okay." Bruce came over to Betsy, crawled into her lap, then draped himself over her shoulder. Betsy was enchanted. She hugged him and kissed him on the head. "Look how sweet he is," she said. Later that day, we saw Bruce rooting in a pile of elephant poop to get at the partly digested kapok seeds. This is from India as well, called Sloth Bear. The road was hot, dusty, and jammed with traffic. Huge trucks laden with gravel roared by. The landscape all around was used up and desolate. Alongside the road was a man with a bear. It was a half-grown sloth bear. It stood on its hind legs and hugged the man around the waist. At our approach, the man held up a rope that laced through the bear's pierced cheeks and nose. He raised a long staff over the bear's head. The bear began to dance. Sloth bears live deep in the forest. They eat fruit, honey, and flowers, and are especially fond of ants and termites. They vacuum them up with special lips and a concave palate. They blow into the nest, then suck up the ants with closed nostrils to prevent the angry ants from going up their noses. They can suck up to 10,000 termites a sitting. They love the flowers of the mahua tree. When the flowers are ferment, they are full of alcohol. The local people think they make the bear drunk, causing him to dance. Paw prints and dung found along cliff edges suggest that the bears sit there to enjoy the panoramic view of the forest below. Mother sloth bears carry their young cubs on their backs as they search for food. Rural villagers believe the bear is the protector of little children. This bear dances on the dusty road to Delhi.
Kerala, India. Bloodsuckers. We were in the Bilagiri Hills station north of Mysore, the name taken from the exposed white limestone hills thereabouts. We were driving with our guide Suni and a ranger armed with a shotgun against wild beasts, should we decide to take a hike in the jungle. We came to an enchanted place, a lovely crystal clear stream bubbling from a spring that rippled over the rocky bed. We asked if we could stop and explore the place. Suni seemed reluctant, but he finally said okay. The ranger with the shotgun went on alert. We got out, set our jackets on a rock, and wandered around the edge of the stream bed. It was an exceptionally beautiful place. Suddenly, we became aware that the ground all around us was moving, crawling. We looked closer. The leaf-covered ground and water were solid with leeches on the move, inching and humping toward us. There was blood to suck, and they knew it. We grabbed our coats and leaped into the rover. That was awful, we said. Sweeney shook his head apologetically. I was afraid of this. Shake out your coats and check under your pants. We picked up our coats. They were crawling with 2-inch long black leeches. We beat them off, then lifted our pant legs, hands shaking. Attached to our legs, swollen out to twice their size with our blood, were a dozen leeches. We began pulling them off in a panic, blood streaming down our legs from the wounds where they had attached themselves. We worked feverishly as it was unbearable looking at them, sucking away like that. Finally rid of them, we calmed down. We looked at the ranger with his shotgun. The look on his face said, if it had been a tiger, I could have done something. This is the Three Camel Lodge in Mongolia. We were staying in the Gobi in a big round nomad tent called a ger. A swirling cloud of insects, big ones, little ones, were drawn to the lights above our beds. We watched them dreamily until we felt sleepy, then doused the lights. Immediately, they all rained down on us, tick, 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 on our blankets, our faces, into our eyes and ears and noses like 1,000 tiny pebbles. We sputtered and swatted and flapped the blankets until they disappeared. I was just falling asleep when I heard a shuffling sound. What's that? I whispered to Ted. I don't know. Sounds like someone shuffling around in bedroom slippers. I was almost afraid to shine a flashlight on the intruder, but I did. The slippered intruder turned out to be a huge cricket the size of a cucumber, shuffling across the floor. I shut off the light and sank back on my pillow. I hope he sleeps with Ted and not me, I thought.
This one's also from Mongolia. It's called Mongolian Wrestling. Dalanzagad, Mongolia, July 2004. Mongolian wrestlers are national heroes, said our guide Betsurin, as we sat on the ground in a big open field in Dalanzagad, a little town in the Gobi. Only men participate, unlike the archery and horse racing events, which include females. Our greatest wrestler bears the title Invincible Titan. In front of us, 6 burly wrestlers flapped their arms gracefully as they performed the Falcon dance. They circled their seconds as their formal titles and accomplishments blared over the PA to stir up their fans and unnerve their opponents. Other wrestlers waited their turns in a brightly colored tent set up at the edge of the field. The wrestlers wore colorful leather boots with upturned toes called gutals, short red and blue silk jackets called zodogs, and brief trunks. They removed their janjins, general's hats, and handed them to their seconds. Then they slammed on each other, grabbing the shirts and trunks of their opponent for leverage. Their faces turned scarlet with exertion as they pushed and shoved one another, looking for an advantage. The seconds circled, constantly encouraging them. Some contests were over in a few seconds. Others ground on and on in the punishing heat. There was no time limit. Finally, there were only 2 wrestlers left, one short and stocky like a fire plug, and the other 6'5", lean as a southern preacher. They locked onto each other and strained for 10 minutes. The tall one finally threw his opponent to the ground and stood triumphantly over him. The crowd cheered wildly. Then the loser passed under the winner's raised arm as a traditional gesture of respect. As we watched them don their janjins and strut up the field, we said to Betsurin, "Funny, their shirts have no fronts, just sleeves and a back. Why is that?" "A long time ago," she said, "a lady wrestler disguised as a man won the tournament, only revealing herself as a woman after her victory. Ever since then, the shirts have been frontless." Looking at these huge, hulking men, we thought, that must have been some woman.
This is Ballinasloe, Ireland, gypsy horses. The horses came tumbling over the slippery stone steps like a black and white tidal wave. The sound of their metal-shod hooves clattered on the hard stone. The shouts of the gypsies and the sound of their whips were gut-wrenching. The steps were too steep for creatures this size, all crowded together, unfamiliar. In their midst, a lean, piebald trotting horse, trapped in the shafts of a sulky, tumbled headlong down the tide, its driver whipping furiously. At the bottom of the stairs was a makeshift corral. 2 days of rain and mud had now mixed with urine and manure. Gypsy boys, their faces streaked with dried snot, mud, and tears from their own whippings, whipped the giant horses across their rumps and feathered fetlocks. The horses whinnied and surged against the metal poles that had been crudely lashed together to contain them. The boys whipped them, and they kicked out with their hind feet. The gypsy men stepped in with stout sticks and wielded them like batons in a riot. The horses tethered to the poles finally settled down. A red-headed gypsy boy whipped them across their rumps, forcing them even tighter against the fence. He did this every few minutes. A passerby, annoyed by this cruelty, asked, "Why are you whipping those horses?" The boy looked up at him without expression, then whipped the horses again. This is called Blue and Yellow, Santa Rosa Lodge, Pantanal, Brazil. Besides the wild hyacinth macaws that can be seen there, the Santa Rosa Hotel has a pet blue and yellow macaw. It's very tame. It's fun to watch it crawl over the thatched roofs and hang by one foot, or use its hooked beak to crawl up the branches of trees. One morning, it was sitting on the handle of the water pump. We went over to talk to it. "Arara," said the macaw. "Arara," we answered. It was easier for us to speak its language than for it to speak ours. It flew up onto my shoulder. I was enchanted and touched that it had chosen me instead of Ted. Then it took my whole ear in its razor-sharp bear trap of a beak, tasting it with its black tongue. I was no longer enchanted. I was terrified. Ted laughed till he cried.
This one's in Brazil. The sailor and the engineer had just returned from fishing. They had caught a big fruit-eating fish called a pacu and a really big black piranha. They pull their skiff alongside a riverboat and tie up. The fish are flopping at the bottom of the skiff, gasping, slowly suffocating. They throw them up on deck. The black piranha's mouth is gaping open and snapping shut. It has razor-sharp teeth. The fishermen climb aboard and proceed to fillet the pacu while it's still alive and flopping. I decide to put the piranha out of its misery, so I pick up a heavy stick from the deck and give the piranha a sharp blow behind the head. The blow is not sure, and the fish flops all the harder. The whole crew is gathered around and laughs heartily. My face reddens, but I'm determined to end the suffering of that poor fish. I hit it again as hard as I can, flops even harder. They laugh even harder. I hit it once more with everything I've got. Finally, it lies still. The crew speaks to one another in Portuguese. I ask my guide, Wilson, what are they saying? He says, they say you enjoy killing.
Now, we're going to take you back home to the U.S., and we're going to Hawaii. The crater. We were staying with our friend, King Curtis Ayukea, a 300-pound Hawaiian professional wrestler, in his A-frame house on the slopes of Haleakala Crater. Over a big bowl of Portuguese stew, he said, "Today we going into the crater. You want to see the nene."
It's a nene.
With that, his eyes got as big as saucers. So after 2 nights in the crater, Curtis took us to his father's ranch on the side of Haleakala. There was much excitement around the barn when we arrived. "I caught me a mongoose," said the captain, Curtis's father, holding up a wire cage. The trapped mongoose paced frantically back and forth. Like goats, mongooses are imported and threaten the native wildlife. "What are you going to do with him?" we asked. "I'm going to drown him," said the captain. "He's not going to steal my chicken." Then he marched purposefully to the horse trough and plunged cage and mongoose into the water. Oddly, the cage was not locked. The door flew open when the cage hit the water, and the mongoose leaped through the air, hitting the ground, running straight into the bush. "Oh, well," said the captain sheepishly, "I'll get him next time." Somehow, we knew he wasn't going to drown that mongoose any more than Curtis was going to shoot that goat. We're in the Florida Everglades. The Bear Lake Trail in the Florida Everglades had suddenly changed from wide open water and grasses to a dense green tunnel through the mangroves. It was nearly impossible to use our paddles, so we started pulling the canoe along by grabbing the overhead branches of the mangroves. I was in the front of the canoe, and reaching up to grab a branch, I saw right next to my hand a pretty little black snake draped over a branch just above my head. I'd almost touched it. Sleek as patent leather with a gleaming shoe-button eye, it lay motionless, undisturbed by our arrival. We turned the canoe at an angle so we both got a good view of it. We stuck our paddles straight down in the water to steady the canoe so we could lean even closer. We now noticed its snowy white throat. Inches away from it, I peered into its eye. "Doesn't look dangerous," I said, remembering that poisonous snakes are supposed to have vertical pupils. This snake's pupils appeared to be round. We stayed a while, almost mesmerized by those shiny little eyes. Then we ducked as low as we could underneath the snake, pulling the branches on either side of the canoe to ease us forward, leaving the snake to its peaceful snooze. Farther along the trail, we met a park ranger in his canoe, and we described the snake to him. "Oh, that's your cottonmouth," he said. "Good thing you didn't get bit. First your blood turns to water, and then your flesh starts to rot, and then you wish you were dead."
Now, we're going to come right back where all these journeys begin, in Brooklyn. It's called Car Service. Brooklyn, New York, September 2000. Kennedy Airport, $30. Penn Station, $25. Anywhere in the Bronx, $30. The price to get almost anywhere in the city was posted all over the front window. Inside was one big room with a map of the city and exotic travel posters all over the walls. We wondered what it would cost to hire a car to Tahiti. A driver slouched in one of broken down chairs pushed up against the wall. A bulletproof plastic partition separated the front and back room. It was a small trapdoor in the partition to safely hand money back and forth. But the door between the rooms was wide open. Behind the partition was a fat man the size of a hippo. The office chair he was sitting in disappeared beneath rolls of fat, as did the phone receiver he held between his ear and his shoulder. He scribbled addresses on a pad with fingers the size of bananas. He looked up at us, each of his many chins covered in stubble, and said, "I'll be right with yous." And then that we noticed it. Behind him, all along one wall, was a fish tank set on a tabletop at eye level. It was 8 feet long with about 10 inches of water in it. It was the movement that had caught our attention. In the tank was a 5-foot-long South American caiman. In the wild, they are very shy and slide into the water if you approach them. This one moved towards us at our approach and pressed the side of its toothy, grinning face against the glass with an unblinking yellow dinosaur eye, a kaleidoscope of glints and specks of gold and black, frighteningly vital and rapacious. It moved even closer, still grinning, its tail swishing back and forth, waiting. "Mice," said the fat man, anticipating our question. "He drowns them first. Where to?" I hope you guys got some questions. We could go on reading these forever, but you posted by the book. Yeah.